Our first pillar of effective feedback is specific. How can we achieve specific feedback? Rubrics. We all know what rubrics are, but I want to share with you the importance and significance of rubrics and the role they can play in our classrooms. When we look at what is necessary to provide effective feedback for our students, we want to start with a rubric. Rubrics provide specific feedback for our students without you, the teacher, spending 5 to 10 minutes writing or typing individual comments on each student's paper. And when rubrics are given to students prior to beginning their assignment, they are able to see exactly what skills will be assessed by their teacher. I have heard so many students, both when I was in high school and as a teacher, complain that some teachers give good grades to students they like, and that essay grading is so subjective, there's no way to guarantee you'll do well on an assignment. Unfortunately, I get it. When I was in high school, I wasn't provided a rubric for each writing assignment that described what I needed to do to earn the highest grade. All I knew was that I needed to write well, whatever that means. What I love about the rubric is that it provides descriptors for each grade outcome, A, B, C, D, and F. It doesn't simply state the expectations of the assignment. A rubric identifies the skills or standards being assessed and then describes what advanced level work looks like, what grade level work looks like, what below grade level work looks like, and failing. Rubrics are an effective way to provide useful feedback in an efficient manner. Teachers who assess student writing are able to utilize a rubric to give specific and timely feedback to over 100 students in a few hours, instead of spending countless hours providing handwritten, tedious marks all over an essay when students are not likely to read or understand the meaning of the marks and comments. The research proves that students who consistently use rubrics, create rubrics together in class, and perform self-assessments based on formal rubrics are able to identify the teacher's expectations clearly before completing an assignment. They are also easily able to identify their strengths and weaknesses because the rubric provides specific feedback. A rubric eliminates the stress of students not knowing which areas of an assignment are necessary to focus on, and it also helps students produce work of a higher caliber since the expectations and vision are provided before they begin. You might be thinking, I've given my students a rubric and they still don't seem to be improving. They don't even read it. Well, a study found that students who do not appreciate the usefulness of a rubric often do not read the entire rubric or believe the rubric is just a list of specific teachers' demands instead of a helpful guide to the expectations of a grade level standard. This is so unfortunate because more and more teachers are using rubrics to provide students with the expectations of an assignment and feedback for their work. But if students do not know how to utilize this tool effectively, the rubric becomes ineffective and students continue to struggle to understand the teacher's expectations. Studies prove that students can and will use rubrics to achieve their goals and increase their writing level as long as they are taught how to understand the rubric. When comparing students who are given the rubrics to those who are not, the students who are given rubrics perform better, not only on specific assignments, but also on tests. When students are able to understand the teacher's expectations, they are more likely to meet those expectations. Students perform better when they are given rubrics. It's that simple. Have you ever experienced this situation? You've designed a Tier 1 assignment that is grade level appropriate, provided clear step-by-step instructions, embedded supports within the assignment, embedded supports within your presentation of the assignment, highlighting, underlining, reading out loud, provided visual aids and handouts, and after you review the assignment, you ask your students what questions they have. And you're met with blank stares. And that one student asks, what are we doing? Okay, maybe one or two students ask a clarifying question, but most of the time those questions could be answered by rereading the directions. As a new teacher, I found myself in these situations often. I assumed it was entirely my responsibility to simply become better at giving directions. But even after years of teaching and improving my instructions, I noticed many students were still not able to conceptualize an assignment after I read the directions and explained the assignment in different ways. I'd release the students to begin the assignment, and only a few would begin working on it in the first 5 minutes. A few more would begin 10 minutes in, and many more would lose focus and get distracted because they didn't know how to begin and didn't even seem to be trying. So then I had my next battle of classroom management. I'd be busy monitoring my students, keeping them on task and answering their questions that could be answered by pointing at the directions. Then, students who didn't finish by the end of class, which would have been plenty of time if they started the assignment in the first 5 to 10 minutes, were instructed to complete the assignment at home. Did they finish? Of course not, because they were still confused. So then not all of the students finished the task and practiced the skill. Then they fell behind. Then they received missing marks in the grade book, which dropped their grade. Then they weren't motivated to succeed in my class. And this was a vicious cycle that led to my frustration and burnout. Marjorie B. Ginsburg believes motivation is essential to effective learning and explains that there are 4 conditions necessary to stimulate intrinsic motivation in any student from any background. These are inclusion, attitude, competence, and meaning. Competence is fostered through authenticity, such as providing transparent grading practices. Rubrics provide those transparent grading practices. Here's another situation I struggled with. The idea that everyone was going to do their job. I would work hard to teach, and students would work hard to learn. However, I found it a rare joy when students worked hard to learn or took personal responsibility for their learning. You can probably recognize those students I'm referring to after the first day or 2 of classes. They watch you while you teach, they might sit up a little straighter during class, they take their own notes, they ask clarifying and inquisitive questions, and they begin assignments almost immediately after receiving the directions. Now, I worked with many different levels of students and abilities, and I want to clarify, I'm not talking about the smarter students. I had many students with learning disabilities who took more responsibility. Can I start over? I meant to do quotation marks. Now I worked. Go down a little. There we go. Now, I worked with many different levels of students and abilities, and I want to clarify that I'm not talking about the smarter students. I had many students with learning disabilities who took more responsibility for their learning than naturally gifted students. I began to wonder what caused this difference. Was it their personality? Was it intelligence? Was it parent-guardian support? Or was it a previous teacher who worked really hard with them to teach them how to be a good student? So I started digging. I was searching for something to research and implement in my classroom that would help all my students become something called self-regulated learners. According to Paul R. Pintrick, self-regulated learning is an active, constructive process whereby learners set goals for their learning and then monitor and control their thinking, motivation, and behavior based on those goals. One day I was introduced to the concept of student-designed rubrics. At first, I was skeptical. Really? A rubric designed by the students? I'm supposed to expect my students to make their own rubrics and then use those exact rubrics to grade their work? I worked in an English department that was focused on standards-based grading and often provided rubrics for major assignments or essays. So I was already comfortable with using and creating rubrics, but the idea of students creating these rubrics was a bit difficult for me to conceptualize. I imagined my students would tell me an A+ could be terrible quality, just so they could easily get an A on the assignment. After extensive research, however, and my own personal experience, I learned that students who were involved in the rubric creation process were able to see what a teacher looks for in an assignment, conceptualize the ideal end product, describe it, and begin to plan out how they would achieve their goal. This gives students command over their own learning process so that they can achieve more, and it teaches them to take a step back to visualize their product throughout the process. These are all skills that allow students to be self-regulated learners and take personal responsibility for their learning. Although including students in the rubric creation process may seem time-consuming and does require assistance from the teacher to guide discussions, it has long-term benefits for the students and allows us to be even more effective teachers. In the next episode, I'll discuss how to design a rubric with your students. 4 positive outcomes of student-designed rubrics are more time on task, positive behavior, higher level questions, and higher academic scores. Doesn't that sound amazing? As I implemented the student-designed rubrics in my classroom, I found that students did not try to tell me that an A+ would be terrible quality. They did a great job working together to accurately describe each grade outcome. In a study that observed the frequency with which students engaged in discussion and questioning that was not in recitation, lecture, or seat work, J.T. Dillon found that in some classes, up to 4 or 5 questions were asked per minute, but the average number of questions asked was 2 per minute. But the only person asking the questions was the teacher. As educators, we understand how important it is for our students to ask their own questions to promote involvement in their learning. One method teachers can use to encourage discussion and questioning is the student-designed rubric. Students work together to discuss assignment expectations and visualize the assignment, and from that discussion stems higher level questions. You've most likely heard of problem-based learning, or PBL. PBL activates learning by inviting the student to take an active role in his or her own learning instead of being a passive recipient of knowledge. Rubrics serve as one part of the problem for students to solve. The assignments they complete are the second part of the problem. Students work with their peers to grapple with the expectations of a project and visualize what a high-performing assignment might look like. This, in turn, causes them to think about the strategies they will use to perform well on an assignment. By tasking students with the creation of the rubric, they are able to become engaged in the language that is used to assess their final product and conceptualize high-quality work. The student-designed rubric promotes metacognition as your students think about their learning. This skill is proven to help your students become better writers.